Feel like the newsroom.
Yeah, that's what it's supposed to feel like.
Welcome to the house, Shawnee.
Ready? Go. Good evening, everyone, and welcome to Just Ask Jen. I'm Jen Wagner, and I'm so happy to be here tonight. We're going to be talking about the fiscal year 26 budget, and we really want to hear from you. So, but let's first start with introductions. To my left,
Oh, well, good evening, everyone. I'm so glad to be here at Just Ask Jen. I'm Shauna Murphy. I am serving Cincinnati Public Schools as the superintendent.
Good evening, everyone. I'm Michael Guston. I'm the Assistant Treasurer.
soon to be the next treasurer.
Bravo.
So, yes, so in 6 months, yes.
I wanted to say back to you, Jen.
Yeah. We're hoping to have just kind of a fun night tonight, talk about budget. We do have a board member that's going to be joining us, got stuck in traffic. So Mr. Craig will be here shortly, so you'll probably see him run across stage and join me to my right. But we want you to participate, and so different ways you can participate. So you can type your question into Facebook in the comments. You can click in Zoom, you can click on the hand icon to ask your question in person or leave a question in the chat. Or you can come to the podium and ask us questions. So we will love for you to be here. Ask us any questions you want around budget, and we'll do our best to answer it. And if not, we'll answer it in the next one. So the next slide is going to show a survey.
Oh, wow. So we have really been trying to engage our public and survey everyone. And we started a couple of weeks ago with all of the members of our district-wide LSDMC, asking them for their feedback and their priorities around items of interest for our budget for the 2025-2026 school year. So today we're asking you to please participate in that survey. And you can do that right now by clicking on the QR code on your screen. That will take you immediately to the survey, and then we will be able to populate that survey, tally the data, and then consider that in future conversations and decisions that we'll make around our budget. Thank you.
So
A helpful tip, you
Yes,
reminded
the
me that
tip,
the
yep.
helpful tip, when you do click on the QR code, the helpful tip is to turn your phone sideways. If you turn your phone sideways, you'll be able to see all of the available options for each and every question.
yeah, so we're trying to hit for over 200 respondents. We're at 93 now, I think. And so we really want you to participate. So you can do that as you listen, or you can wait until later. Well, it stays open until we finish the process, right?
That sounds great, yes.
Okay, so moving on to building the budget. So we've had to kind of pause our traditional budget building practice because we have some unnerving news related to the state budget and some future risks to our finances. We'll go into that a little bit. But so we decided we just want to pause and kind of just reset, go back to zero, and figure out how we allocate the rest of those available funds. So if you'll go to the next slide for me, Rob. So if you were watching the board meeting last night, you would have seen this, but we'll just do a real quick run. Starting with our forecasted revenues in the general fund. We're just talking about general fund tonight. We have about $624 million that was forecasted as of last November. So if you recall, all 611 school districts in the state of Ohio have to file 2 5-year forecasts in the general fund in November and in May. And we usually use the November forecast to set the budget target, and then as the May forecast gets refined, and then we refine the budget target. I'm going to pause there and introduce our new partner here.
Hi, everybody. Brandon Craig, board member. You should recognize me from many of these other past Just Ask Jen sessions.
And he serves on finance.
I am on the budget, finance, and growth committee. Yes.
There you go. Okay, so going back to the $624 million in revenue. So right off the top, we were trying to start building up our cash reserves again, kind of like a savings account. And so we're going to take $1 million to help start building that back up. So that leaves us with $623 million of available resources to build a budget on in the general fund. Then the next group is things that the district is obligated to spend. We used to call them fixed expenses, but sometimes the values change from year to year, so they're not really fixed expenses in the traditional accounting sense. So we're just calling them obligated costs. Some are fixed, like our debt payments are fixed, and the Fund 34 transfer to our building maintenance fund is a fixed value that was defined by the state. So then we have some variable things that they happen every year. We can't cut them, but the values change for a variety of reasons. Like utilities will fluctuate with how bad a winter we have, right? And so anyway, so those things total up to be about $61 million. And so right off the top, we're down to $562 million in available resources. So next slide. Oops. So now the money that's left over, the $562 million, gets allocated to these different categories. And so we're talking about those. We have our personnel, we have professional services, supplies, capital equipment, and some others like memberships and awards and incentives for our schools. And so what we did is we costed out the cost of every general fund funded position that we have today, what next year's salary would be, and that came up to be about $476 million. So if you keep all the bodies, we're down to $86 million available to allocate to all these wonderful things: transportation, custodial supplies, curricular software, stuff like that. And so we have some tough decisions to make, and that's why we're looking for feedback. So the next slide just kind of shows like the major buckets. I won't go into them because I went over them in detail last night, but you can read them at your leisure as we're talking or taking into questions. So we'll leave that up there while we open up for some questions just about what we've talked about so far. We have a couple other things to talk about in terms of the state budget, Senate Bill 66, and then talk about a little bit about levies, about generating some more revenue. So, we have any questions there, Rob, or any, sorry, I didn't smack you.
Yeah, we're also going to start with a quick reminder on Facebook. If you're watching, how to engage. You can go ahead and leave questions in the chat. As more and more people come on and engage, we'd love to hear back from you. This is, again, about the budget. We're taking questions from you, the audience, so we appreciate it. Our first question is, what is the biggest challenges in this budget cycle so far from the information you've shared now?
So let's start with Superintendent Murphy on that question.
Yeah, I appreciate that, Treasurer Wagner. So biggest challenge, just the mere fact that each year we have less and less revenue in order to work with and support our children in the schoolhouses. Before the pandemic, we had additional dollars in the form of wellness. During the pandemic, we had rounds of ESSER dollars. Well, here we are now preparing for the 2025-2026 school year, and we have none of that. And so we're talking about a difference of millions of dollars that went into staffing, that went into programming, that went into better efficiencies for our schoolhouses. We won't have those moving forward.
And quite frankly, our revenues have not kept up with the rate of inflation on how expensive things are. Mr. Craig, how would you answer that question?
I mean, I think the biggest challenge that we continue to face is that everything sounds great that we do. I don't think we have too many programs that we would sit there and say, this sounds like a terrible idea, so let's get rid, like if it was not working or if it wasn't a great idea, we'd get rid of it. What we are now faced with is having to address things that we like, but we just can't afford. And I think that's why this is so hard, is because everybody has everybody has a log in the fire of something, right? We all have an idea that we like or a program we like, the things that we appreciate and gain great value doing, pet projects we probably helped spearhead or something to the effect that we're now at a point where we can't afford it. And I think that is ultimately going to be the hard decision that I think, in some ways, that's the board's role, is to give some of that priority to say, you know what, I think we all like this, we all think it's great, but we understand why we can't do it anymore. And then allow the superintendent and the treasurer to be able to make those recommendations as to maybe we can't do it in the same way, but we might do it differently. So I think that's really the challenge, is we have to get through that first hurdle to say, love this idea, we love how much it is benefit to our students, but this is something we can't do anymore. And that's a really big hurdle, especially when we have lower revenues, when our expenses are going up, and all the other things that are part of that conversation.
So Mike, how would you answer that question?
Well, obviously, I think what Member Craig said, very, very much agree with those. I think something we haven't talked about is, the unknowing part of our revenue picture right now, and while we're waiting on the state to work through their budget, it dramatically changes how the amount of resources we have available. And so not only are we trying to hit a hard target, but we're also trying to hit a hard moving target.
It is tough because budget cuts are emotional, right? And everybody wants to feel valued. And then when you start talking about reducing what they do, they start to feel undervalued. But at the same time, so I've been the treasurer for 10 years, so this is my 5th time having to do biennium budgets from the state. And from the day it gets introduced to the day it gets passed, sometimes it's dramatically different. So there's a balance between acting and preparing and panicking people. And so I think keeping that balance is really difficult. So
And
that's how I would
think
answer
too,
that question.
Jen, that's a really, really good point, striking that balance. And when you think about, and I think we'll get into this a little bit later on, we talk about what's coming from the state, but I do want to pinpoint here because it's a pain point in the fact that there are proposals that we in public education will get fewer dollars, yet there is money available for charters, vouchers to get more dollars in education. I just don't know how fair that is to public education and the number of students that we serve and need to educate.
I think the one other thought that I had, and it was tying a little bit off of what Mike mentioned, is there is this level of uncertainty in the world, but specifically in how our government, our national government budgets will be, our state government budgets will be, whether or not there's funding, and all these things that we'll be talking about. But that level of uncertainty also means that our community partners and community members feel a level of uncertainty on what we can provide and what will be provided. And what that then does is it creates a level of anxiety, right? So when you go to recruit teachers and you tell them we gotta have great jobs, and they're thinking, okay, well, wait a minute, but are you gonna have the money, right? When you go to recruit programming, when we go to talk to students about ways to do multilingual learners and the things that we want to do with those students, is the first thing they're thinking about, gosh, they have this great program, they have the Welcome Center, they have all these wonderful things, or is the first thing they're thinking about is the federal government coming for me and my family, right? And that level of anxiety does play a part also in, sometimes it's easier when you have a great feeling in the world to recruit people, to have people come in and step in and volunteer, to have people step in and offer, services and funds and these type of things, versus when there's a lot of anxiety in the world. So I think that's.
Well, and you sparked an idea in my head about sustainability. So we start a new program because we have a biennium budget that we can support it. And then in 2 years, the biennium budget changes and you can't support it anymore. What do you do? And that happens a lot when you start with grants. You start a new program with some kind of a grant. Because when that grant ends, nobody wants to drop that thing, and they want the general fund to pick it up. Excuse me. So yeah, that's an interesting question. How about another one? Do we have another question?
Yeah, the next question is about technology. In your buckets slide, you have curriculum, you have technology. At one time, curriculum was all books, and they passed down from student to student to student. Technology is a great advantage for students today, but how has it also affected the budget in negative or positive ways today for the public?
It's a great question. So because we enter the digital world, and COVID helped speed this transition up, because Lauren, listen to me. Sean and I were in different roles when we started this whole movement into the digital curriculum world, and it kind of exploded as we went remote learning. But you're right, so textbooks tend to last a little bit longer, assuming they're not lost, but or destroyed. But the software companies have latched on to a new industry where they provide textbooks, but it's a subscription service based on the number of students. So you're kind of paying for that textbook every single year. So that has increased our costs in terms of the cost of curriculum. And then, of course, fine arts and foreign language are newer curriculums that have started, kind of jumped into that circle. Very much needed, very much valued. It's just when you look at it as a whole pot of money, it's a lot of money.
And to add on to that, when we entered into the world of the pandemic, we were able to make a way that all of our students had some type of take-home devices, whether our youngest learners had iPads to even up our juniors and seniors having devices, laptops to take home. And last year, we had to make the decision that our youngest students wouldn't have those take-home devices. Well, that was disappointing because we got used to it. We like it. It helps us compete in the global marketplace in terms of being the best of the best, but we had to take a step back. And who knows, this year may lend itself to us taking an even further step back, but we're doing everything we can to be prepared and to still be able to provide our young people with high-quality education.
I think that's actually a great example of us making a decision that reflected the budget limitations, but also reflected that we did not have people substantially using the products that we were providing. So while for some students, in some cases, it was of great benefit, what we did not see was 75% of the students using their device from their home. What we did not see is 75% of the students who had devices having some level of great achievement because of having the device. And that's a thing that we have been really working on, that ROI, right? What is that return on investment? I think that is substantially harder on the curriculum side of things because there are some wonderful tools and devices and things that we use that is technology driven, that are absolutely beautiful, that enhance the educational experience and the learning that students do. And there are others that are beneficial, sure. Are we going to see a market increase in what the student outcomes are from using those devices or using that technology? I think that's what we have to start thinking about in some ways when we talk about the dollar amount, because to your point, students don't learn the same way they learned before. Handing a student a math book and saying, go at it, is not how a student learns math anymore. They're going to need supplemental materials. They're going to need things that they can relate to. But we don't have an infinite budget to do that. And I think one of the things that we may see more of, and this is where it's a great opportunity for us to be exploring that with our teachers, who are our true partners on the ground, are there tools or resources that have worked better? Mm-hmm. Right? And as we get more of that feedback and we do those curriculum reviews, we'll start to figure out what are those things that maybe this just isn't worked. Like maybe this wasn't, having the audio version of this didn't help any, so we don't need that particular thing. But I think that's something we have also gotten ourselves a little bit better about. And then the one other thing I wanted to mention really quickly was that, and I've appreciated what we've been doing around this, is getting people to actually use the curriculum. I think that's the other part, is for when I first came on the board, there was a big discussion around, we had curriculum and we had other things people were using and we had other tools and all the different technology that were going along with some of that. Getting consistency of what people are using and having people use it will give us a better idea of whether or not it's effective. And so that's stuff that we've been working on, and I think it's something that's also for the last year and a half has really been the focal point on curriculum.
Okay. So was there another question you wanted to do, or should we move on?
For the public, you have a couple buckets here. Tuition. Why does Cincinnati Public Schools pay $22.2 million in tuition?
That's a great question. Some of it's required because of foster placement, and the resident district is, by court order, is required to pay for that child's education, but they may be placed in another district or in a specialized school to better fit their needs. We have some students with disabilities have some really specific needs that can't be served in our buildings, so we pay for their education. CCP, College Credit Plus, we pay tuition for that. What's another example of tuition that we pay for?
Those are the big buckets.
Those are the big buckets.
DSS, and then
Yeah.
the foundation stuff we never really say.
So we're required to pay for the education of our residents regardless of whether they're educated. That's, okay, good question though, thank you. Okay, so move to the next slide. We're going to talk a little bit about the threats we're facing regarding our revenue stream. So keep going, one more slide. So right now, Governor DeWine has issued his biennium budget, and it's in the House right now being debated. There's some concerns for particular urban districts, and I'll go through those in just a second. Once it gets to the House, it'll go through to introduced in the Senate, so we'll have an opportunity to testify. I saw a draft letter from the superintendent today talking about the impact of CPS. It's going to go out to all of our families, so hopefully will spark some action and some attention from our legislators. And it's too bad today couldn't have been the day we had our legislators in. Okay, so, but they have to adopt a budget before June, and that'll cover the state side of our revenue for the next 2 years. So next slide. So the urban treasurers, who we huddle every Thursday morning and just share ideas, experiences, ask each other questions. It's really, it's just 30 minutes. And we started it during COVID just for like emotional support for each other. But it's turned into a really great group of people that we really lean on each other. But we actually, in face-to-face gathered on February 13th in Columbus. I've listed the treasurers, the school districts that participate, and Mike went with me. And so we just talked about, we went through the line items of the state budget and how is it going to impact us. So if you recall, the fair funding formula was phased in over 6 years. And so while in theory, I love the formula, they didn't fix the problem that got the state of Ohio into trouble, which is the over-reliance on property values. But because they're trying to get to per pupil, and the needs of the students, and try to get funding to follow the need of the student, that's great. It's a great first start. But they're phasing it in, so in fiscal year 26, we wanted to make sure that we were gonna get 83% of that funding, because the first 2 years, we lost $65 million of revenues because they didn't fully fund the formula. So that will help us. So we're trying to hold on to that. But prior to that, they decided not to update the base cost factors from 2022. So what that means is when they go through the formula, they calculate, okay, this is how many kindergarten students you have, this is how many kindergarten teachers you need, multiply that times the average salary of the state, and the benefits, and that's your funding for that line item before they do the state share cut. So the problem is everybody's received raises and COLAs since 2022. So if they're only going to fund us at 2022, I think that gap for us is like $179 million because our state share is only 36 cents on the dollar this year. Next year is going to be 30 cents on the dollar. So for every dollar a student generates in that formula, we only get 30 cents. And that covers, if I had a thought, it would be really interesting is that if your state share drops down below some threshold, they release us from all their rules.
One of the things
Wouldn't that be interesting?
was just thinking about, though, as we talk about that too, is you're talking about state share. What we're talking about is a state share of an amount that they say is what it costs to educate a student. What they are not doing, though, and that when they come up with that cost of educating a student, is thinking about what is the average student in the state,
Right.
right? So what they're saying is for the students, if you had no other additional needs, this is what we'd say the average cost would be, right? And then we add on the other stuff.
8101 is what it is for our base cost.
Yeah.
And we spend about 12 to 13,000 per kid on
But
average.
the reality is in urban districts, we don't have classrooms of just the model kid that they're talking about as the state budget. So I think it's an interesting twist that we do on that state budgeting model, is that it's really built off of a student who has no additional needs.
But they do categorical funding for
Yeah.
gifted English language learners, students with disabilities, and career tech.
But the struggle is that, like, if you have a classroom where you have a student who has those additional needs, it's not like they're in a separate room from a student who doesn't, right? And so in some ways, we are always going to be funding and then adding in a little extra, right? Like, that's how we do our funding model.
Right.
As opposed to the reality, which is that if you have two students who have, some severe needs in a class, or you have some students who have severe needs in a school, that school always is going to cost more to educate than what the state is going to ever budget for.
Right.
And so then you add that into the 30% less, and it's
Right.
just weird.
And the reason the state of Ohio does that is because we enjoy local control, and so they say if you're gonna have local control, then you can help fund it. But it's, the balance has gotten so far out of whack. When I first started, or when the DeRolf case came, we were at 48, so almost 50% from state and 50% from property taxes. Now we're down to 70-30.
So Jim,
Yeah.
just to
Jump in.
just to jump in on the formula thing, it's not that just that they're holding the base cost at 2022 levels. They're updating all the other pieces of the formula. So they're updating our property wealth to the most recent. They're
Yes.
updating the income, the district income to the, so they're picking and choosing which parts of the formula to change.
Right.
And because of
Right.
those choices, it's going to have a significant negative impact on us.
I
And
know
then,
for me, I was in school in the late 80s in education, and state funding in Ohio for schools was unconstitutional. And we just keep moving backwards and backwards, and no one is stepping up to say, hey, this is just wrong.
It's been ruled unconstitutional 4 times. So the next area in our concerns is that when they introduced the fair funding formula, they didn't change anything with the special education weighting. They paid for this big study, and they spent the last 2 years doing this study. Well, the study's complete, but because it's gonna cost $1 billion to implement, they just put it on hold. And so we really, while our percent of students with disabilities has not changed, the mix of students within that has changed to a more costly instructional plan. Our district has really exploded with autism because the Children's Hospital is drawing those people to our region. And we welcome those kids, we just want help funding them, right?
Exactly. And I don't think people understand that various kids with various needs, it equates to how many kids are in a classroom.
Right.
And so a classroom teacher will cost so much more because of the needs that they have to meet with the kids who are in their particular classroom.
On a per pupil basis,
On a per
right.
pupil basis, and I just don't think people on a wide scale think of it that way.
So correct me if I'm wrong, but I think in autism classroom, it has a max of 8 students, and an MD, multiple disabilities, is a max of 6.
That's correct.
So, but we're paying the teachers the same salaries.
I think the other thing quickly on that too also is the additional resources that we're getting from the state are not based on the level of care needed for the special education student. It's based on the student being labeled special education student, right?
Correct, on their disability code,
Yeah,
yes.
so like it's not, like we may say that we need the truth is that some students have a disability that has very little additional resource need. They don't necessarily need to be pulled out, but those students have severe needs. That factor may still look the exact same way on how the state measures what resources you get. So I think that's another part of the problem.
So another area of concern on the formula is the way they're funding disadvantaged or economically disadvantaged students. They keep changing the terminology. It's now called disadvantaged pupil funding. Right now, we have a program called the Community Eligibility Plan, which allows school districts to feed 100% of their students free breakfast and lunch. And so they're considered 100% disadvantaged. Well, they want to change that label to only direct certification, and so it lowers our percent from 87% of our students to 62, 67.
Something, yeah. 60.
We don't know how that's going to impact us because it's all relative to the state. So you take your number and that compares you to the average of the state. So wherever you are on that index, so we may go down and everybody else could go up, and it could be harder for us than if we all stay relatively the same. So that's the area of concern. The next one is they changed the language on the use of buildings. In terms of if you are under capacity, 60%, and they changed the rules about what that means. So you either compare, the capacity is either your facility master plan capacity or the highest enrollment over the last 10 years. So if you're at 60% of that or lower, they're gonna force you to sell the building. But you don't sell the building for market value like everybody else does. They want it to be an instructional value, so your sales cost is gonna go down. And that whole line item is very problematic because a lot of school districts who participate in the facility master plan, they help fund that plan through bond levies. And so we're beholden to the bondholders, and we can't just sell property out from under because that's what's the leverage? What am I thinking of, the term? When you put
So,
your
I mean,
house up for leverage?
Collateral.
Collateral,
Yeah.
thank you. God, I'm getting old.
And so along those lines, it's so interesting because this also goes back to what Board Member Craig shared about the number of students in a classroom. So you may have a building where we've said, based on the FMP, the capacity is 550 students. Well, is that taking into consideration you may have classrooms that have to have 6 students or 8 students or fewer even, and I don't know that that's always considered. And another caveat in particular for Cincinnati Public Schools is we've created community learning centers. And so in our community learning centers, we've invited partners to come and be co-located in our buildings. That's space that's available in our buildings as well. And while that is a value that we hold dear to us, this language will penalize us for wanting to partner with our community.
That's right, that's right.
I think the other part to it, and this goes again to what's counted and what's not counted, is we have, some of the most extensive preschool opportunities of any district in the state of Ohio, right? Preschoolers don't count towards the number of students in your building when we come to budgeting, right? And I think there's still some question as to whether or not preschoolers would count towards the number of students in a building for capacity, enrollment numbers, right? Because, and again, I think this is one of those challenges we continue to face, is that the language from the state isn't clear.
Yeah.
So when we go in and say, what's it being used for educational purpose? All right, so if you take a room and make it into a design room for a fashion design program, because you got a number of students who want to do it, you're creating that as a career tech, is that room being used for educational purposes? Absolutely. Is the number of people who in your building changes on your FMP? Probably not. And that becomes a problem because now you can't offer the things that the state tells you to offer because the state won't allow you to modify how the facility is being used in your FMP.
Right.
So
And I
it's-
wonder how the public would feel about the fact that it's their tax dollars that paid for a public school building, and now you have legislators who are giving money to charters, privates,
Because the
parochials.
buildings have to be offered at charter schools first.
But the people of the community said, this is a public school building. And other people who may not necessarily live directly in your community are saying, yeah, no, we're going to do something else with it.
That's right.
My other favorite part is that it has to go to, was it a high-performing charter school? Well, okay, in many of our areas, we know that there are very few high-performing schools. So what we're going to end up doing is selling these buildings out for less than value. And what we're going to do is have people having to travel further for school. And especially in some of our northern urbans, which are basically all of our urbans, but because everyone's north of us, but in some of our, in Columbus and Cleveland, where they've spent a lot of time dedicating certain schools for purposes, that's going to be a really hit for them.
Right.
And I do want to point out, while this year our board and administration have done a lot of work to take care of many of those buildings of concern that are in our portfolio, whether it is over the 10-year period of time or related to the FMP numbers, we do still have a couple of buildings that could be of concern for us.
Yeah, so those decisions might be taken out of our hands, right? Okay, so if you hit to the next slide. So if all the language in the governor's budget stays the same as it is today, thank you, the impact to next year would be a reduction of $10 million in our revenues. This is all based on their simulations. And then another $5.8 million a year after that. Having said that, I've never seen the language stay exactly the same the first time it gets introduced. So things are going to change. Don't panic yet, but just stay informed and help us get out the word where we need help. Right.
Well, speaking of getting out the word, before you move on, Jen, You know, this conversation is great to try to help and inform the public, but even this morning, we had a large group, a large presence at our schools with union leaders, union presidents, teachers, community members, parents, all rallying around our kids coming into the buildings this morning, holding signs to try to bring awareness and increase education about what is happening in our state.
So I missed that, but I did get to go out to school today to do the Junior Achievement Financial Literacy Day, and it was a blast. They did a really nice, Junior Achievement does a nice job. Okay, so if we'll move on to the next slide. So this is another big area of concern. In fact, I'm more concerned about this than I am about some of that other language. And it's the Senate Bill 66 that wants to move, this is a little complicated. So in the state of Ohio, they say you have to have at least 20 mills to operate. So if you go above that, that's great. If you go below that, they raise taxes to get you back up to the 20 mil floor. Well, only the fixed rate levies qualify into this calculation. We have fixed sum levies. There's a legislator out there who wants to move the fixed sum levy millage into that calculation. So we're below the 20 mil floor right now. If they move the fixed sum levy in, we'll go above the 20 mil floor, we'll lose about $22 million. Having said that, there are 449 districts in the state of Ohio out of the 611 that are on the 20 mil floor. So this is going to hit 449 school districts. And was it 7 of them in Hamilton County? So we need to get the word out that this is, it's one thing if you want to freeze it and you can't do any more fixed sum levies and, you know, moving forward, but don't penalize for this, for our past strategies, because it will be devastating to us. I mean, 22 million would be 275 people.
Well, and I think, you know, again, this goes into a little bit of, we have these conversations about strategies when you look at levies. And I think there's a misconception, and especially with fixed, we've had this conversation all the time with fixed sum levies. There's only a certain amount of dollars you're gonna get. That's all you get, right? Like, that's it.
What the voters approved.
And that's sometimes a benefit to voters to know that this is the dollar amount that we approved for you all to get. Whereas with fixed rate levies, somewhat can fluctuate and somewhat can bring in a little bit more revenue.
With new construction, yes.
Yes. And so one of the challenges, I think, in somewhat of understanding is that this is not being done as a method of improving or changing a formula to make it better anymore. It's really to penalize those districts who went to their voters and said, you know what, we understand you have concerns, we understand we don't want your taxes to go up any more than it needs to, so we thought this is the best way to ensure that you know what the amount you're gonna give us each year is, right? And I have heard a lot of folks ask why we use those, and I think that's part of it, is that it's a clear message to voters. You understand what a $48 million fixed sum levy is.
Well, plus they're fixed on cycles, so we always had to come back to the public to ask for renewals.
Yep.
So it was a way to hold us accountable to our spend. Mike, I failed to explain why we got under the 20 mil floor. You want to explain the House reduction factor?
Yes, so I was going to chime in there. So
you.
with fixed rate levies, they're passed at a rate. There's a law, House Bill 920, yes, was passed a long time ago in the 70s that basically to shield property owners from inflation, it reduces your millage as your value goes up. So I mean, I've said it before, that you know, the property tax system is self-leveling for the most part, and there are some opportunities to get more money, but the idea is as your property values go up, your millage goes down or your rate goes down, and so you end up generating roughly the same amount of money year over year.
Right.
And so we all fell far enough that we fell under the 20.
So some of the levies that we had that started in the early 70s are down to 2 mils. So they may have passed at 12 mils, but now they're down to 2 mils. So that's why we're under the floor. I hope that makes sense. You want to say anything? Anything else?
Only other thing I will add to that is that is a part of also the higher the values that go up, so in which our mills will go down. It also means the state says we're a more wealthy district.
Yes.
So the better the city does, so that the lower the millage rates are, the less funds we get from the state.
Yeah.
So it's not like we get more revenue from these higher values in homes. It really just means the state gives us less.
Right. So do we want to pause and ask for questions from the biggest audience we've had in a while?
Cutest too, actually. So, all right. Yeah, we have a question from Facebook. It's sad for all these books we've bought aren't being used consistently or by teachers. Question, which costs less, PC software and/or books, paper, and printing?
I think it's a mixed bag on that though, because a book cost, it's not that you get one or the other, and it's not that you don't, because you use it differently, right? So I would imagine that, like, for instance, the life cycle of a book is probably cheaper than the life cycle of a piece of software, but the way they're used are two very different things. But
And I would agree with that. It is really, really hard to say. They both have really amazing value in the classroom. I mean, the ability to have technology at your fingertips and to be able to research or to speak with young people your age across the world, or just in another school district, or even if you're home sick for the day with your classroom teacher, is absolutely amazing. The beauty of a textbook coming from an English teacher, however, is also greatly valued and cherished in many ways, to actually be able to lift stories and lift histories from the pages of a textbook is often considered magical. So I don't know that I would be able to put a value or a level of importance on one versus the other. They're both extremely valuable for different reasons.
Yeah, and some people learn differently, right?
I will say, you can sometimes see the cost, like just from someone who looks deep in the financials. Like the years that we buy a lot of workbooks, you'll see the printing, the copy costs go down, and the years we don't have a lot of workbooks, you'll see the copy costs go up. So they kind of level each other.
And by the same token, with the technology, well, there's maintenance involved, not only on an annual basis or replacing tablets or computers, but even day to day, something, a key could pop, and you need somebody to get that back on. So
Electricity goes out.
electricity goes out, there's a surge, power surge.
There's a wind,
Yeah.
there's a wind advisory tonight, so be careful with
I
that.
think the one challenge also when we talk about curriculum too is that we have cycles on which we do curriculum changes. So that's like when we're going to buy new books, we're going to look at all this other stuff. Technology, on the other hand, one year you may have a company that says this is the cost. The next year they may change that cost, or the product might change and we don't use it anymore. So I think there is a little bit of a difference in how we handle books and when we're thinking about how we buy a book for a classroom than how we buy technology.
And it's easy to fall behind because software companies have a way of forcing you to stay on, or they quit supporting your software. You know, I remember in the days when we wouldn't have a textbook adoption for 13 years, right? And so, and in social studies, you're not keeping up with the current events and stuff like that. So there's a lot of pros and cons to that question. It was a great question. I like that. Another one?
So we have about 10 minutes left. I want to remind anyone if they'd like to engage, they're welcome to just leave it in the comments. We'll make sure to pull it out and ask before we end. Our last question for the state funding piece is, what's the motivation behind all of these sudden changes or all these changes from the state? Is there a goal? Is there a reason behind it?
So you want the
I'll let you get the-
well-stated answer, or you want the real answer? Because the well-stated answer is they have a certain philosophy about education. The real answer is they don't like public education. The real answer is they do not want to fund public education. They do it under the guise of school choice, which is not really choice, because if your kid has got disciplinary issues, if your kid is a lot of disability needs, if your kid has a lot of reasons that would make the district have to pay more dollars to educate them, those kids will not be accepted. Those kids will be left in the public school district who will have less funds and kids who have more needs. And the reality is there's this belief that kids who have difficulties in life that are presented before them should be able to be educated for the lowest dollar amount. But the kids who have advantages and opportunities, they get all the extra dollars. And I think that's the problem with the state government's model of this school choice. That's the problem with school choice conversations. That's the problem with this idea of saying it's up to the parents, because it really isn't. It's up to whoever that school, that parochial school, that charter school, that private school says, I want in my building. And all the other kids are brought here. And I think the other part I'll add to that is that we have a number of places that have attempted to do educating our students, and there's no check on how they do that. So what happens? The student comes back to the public school further behind than when they left. And that is not a part of the conversation that the state folks want to have, because they don't want to acknowledge that a number of the charter schools who have failed, who have gotten all the funding they needed and couldn't make it happen, and couldn't make it work.
I remember at least 2, maybe 3 charter schools who decided to announce, we're closing and you won't have any place to come on Monday, so.
Yeah, I'm glad Board Member Craig answered that question very well.
Yes.
Good job.
Thank you.
So books are popular tonight. Why does the district not do inventory on books in schools before they buy them? We buy books that teachers already have in their classrooms.
Before we answer that question, can I just do one reminder? Because I don't want to lose out on opportunities for voice through our survey. So if you have not had a chance yet, before we close out, I really want to make sure people have an opportunity to click on our QR code that Rob is taking us back to.
Yep, you can
just
just
so
leave it
we
there.
can have your information before we close out. Thank you.
I'm going to leave this up for a moment while you continue the conversation.
Yeah.
So we're talking about books.
I forgot the question
so if you
already.
Good question.
So yeah, why doesn't the district inventory books in school before we buy them? And why are we buying books that teachers already have in the classroom?
Yeah. Well, we do utilize our textbooks. We do have professional development to help teachers be able to pull out all of the standards that need to be taught to children on a regular basis. What is happening is the books get updated. And so in order for our students to stay updated with what's currently happening in the world, we have to have new adoptions, which then allow us to be able to give prime time, prime exposure to our kids versus holding on to a textbook for 13 years that is outdated.
Well, and some of our most recent curriculum, correct me if I'm wrong, also has had a lot to do with the lack of diversity in our education as well, the last few curriculums. So that's been a recent update as well, correct?
I think one of the things we've tried to do is have accurate history, right? So you want to have accurate information in there. And I think that goes to why we update things, right? Because I joked when I was in law school, my law school professor's son was at Walnut and had my math book, right? From when I was a ninth grader at Walnut.
Wow.
And so that was a good, at that time, 10-year difference in education. Well, yeah, so some of those books don't change. But the history book that I had that was my modern history class that ended in 80 was not modern history, right? And I think that's the reality, though, is that we have to do that because there are things that change. We just went through a cycle of 10 years now, or not even 10 years, like 5 years. We had a substantial Supreme Court cases that changed a lot of what history means and a lot of what is now the understood history. We've had a lot of new developments. If you're not changing the book to reflect those things, you're giving kids bad information. Even our reading and some of the literature we're doing, we've updated some literature in these books so that they have a more diverse picture of reading to get to, so they understand and have experiences that may match to their own lives. Like that is the coolest part about when you read in a class and you can relate to the subject matter and feel some connection to it. You want to read more. And I've never understood why that was something that we did not think was a good idea, or why folks who don't think it's a good idea to have the students reflected in the materials that they're learning from and they're reading from. But that is a large part of why we buy books, is because there's something new that has happened or some change or some update that is necessary.
Even the top of this programming, Treasurer Wagner mentioned, we gave this presentation last night during the board meeting. That ended about 9:15 p.m. And so even this had to be updated since just a few hours ago.
Right.
So
Information
data
just changing,
changes,
right.
information changes, and we want to give the most accurate information to the public. We want to give the most accurate information to the kids.
So the last couple of slides, we can actually even hold them until another time, but was just to go over, the upcoming levies, so people are aware. We have, if you want to, sorry, you're going to flip back to spaghetti, or slinky slide, there you go. We call it the spaghetti slide, the slinky slide. It just shows you that early on, we had 3 fixed sum levies with 5-year cycles. So for every 4 years, we're on the ballot every 3 years. And so we've extended 2 of them, we've extended to 10-year cycles. We do have the option of going continuing. I couldn't talk the board into it back then, but I keep trying. So we have 2 10-year cycle levies, but the third one that's coming up is the $48 million levy that was passed in 2016. It has a $15 million set aside to expand preschool that's shared by CPS and the Cincinnati Preschool Promise. Both entities have grown outside that $15 million set aside. We're about $20 million now. And so we have a decision to make about what to do about that $15 million. But that's coming up for renewal in November of '26. It won't hit our budget until the fiscal year 26-27 budget, because property taxes are paid in arrears. And then the next levy after that is a $65 million levy, and that comes up in '28. And then the next one comes up in '32. So we've been talking about, if you want to hit to the next slide, what are we going to do with that $48 million levy? We know we need new money because the state is pressuring us to go back to the property taxes for more money just to stay above ground and not even try new things. So we need to decide the $48 million levy. We also have these beautiful facility master plan buildings that we've had. They're now 20 years old. They need new roofs, new chillers, new HVAC systems. And so our expert facility people led by Chris Burkhart put together a repair plan. It's a 5-year repair plan, which I think is a little industrious, but anyway, it's going to cost us anywhere from 172 to 200 million, because we all know construction costs continue to rise. We need to find a funding mechanism. The board is considering some options to do a permanent improvement levy, or the possibility of an income tax levy to alleviate property taxes. So we're just looking at some options. There also, as part of the growth plan that you've been hearing a lot about, phase 3 would involve.
And Jen, real quick before that, property taxes, this is a question that was passed, do go into the general fund. They affect the general fund correctly,
That's
directly.
correct. That's correct.
Thank you.
General operating fund, yes. Although a permanent improvement levy can go into a separate permanent improvement fund. So fund accounting, you have like these different journal ledger books for each of your purposes.
The bond levy has its
The
own
bond,
fund
yes,
as
the
well.
bond levy has
so,
its own fund
yes.
too. So, so for the most part, general operating levies go into the general fund, and then other purpose go into different funds. But it's a great question. So anyway, so back to the growth plan. Phase 3 has a need for some construction renovation. Well, like one example would be the need for a third Montessori high school. And so we can't possibly carve that out of our operating fund. So we're going to look at using the expiration of the first bond levy that helped us build the facility master plan. That expires December 1st of 2031. We'll make our last debt payment. But so in November of 30, we can go back on the ballot to kind of replace, you can't do a replacement, but you can replace that bond with a new bond levy. Much smaller, so it'll lower taxes, yay.
Yay.
And so those are the things that we're talking about. We talk about them in our public settings, so if you want to stay educated, interested, keep listening to board meetings. Come to the board meetings and talk to us. We would love to hear from you. And answer that survey, right?
Please and thank you.
So we have several more budget engagements. I
With
forgot to
different
put the dates
times of
out
the
yet.
day.
I forgot to add that slide. Today's the 4th.
Our next one will be on March 4th at 2:30 PM. You can find us on Facebook.
March what day?
4th. March 4th at 2:30 PM.
That's today.
Hey, we're
I'm
today's
sorry,
the
March
4th.
6th, Thursday, March 6th.
Takes a village, doesn't it?
We missed it.
It's time for us all to go to sleep.
Backwards and
See, we
forwards.
have to keep updating. See, that's why we have to get new textbooks. We have to keep updating.
March 6th at 2:30 PM.
Okay, thank you. So any last thoughts?
Thank you for joining us. We appreciate it, and we're very sincere about wanting your feedback.
The one last thought I will share, and I think this is something I'm going to keep sharing going forward, is that I think we have to make sure we're talking about the great things that our preschool, quality preschool expansion has done for our district, for the kids in our district, and why this is so important that we continue to fund quality preschool opportunities within our city. Because if we don't, no one else will. And so I think it's something we have to keep saying.
Thank you. Thank you and good night.
Thank you.